Welcome. My name is MarÍa Teresa Kumar, and I am the president of Voto Latino. And today we are kicking off a very needed discussion to discuss the importance of enfranchising, empowering, mobilizing, organizing, and doubling down on the Latino community. This week, as you know, is the Democratic Convention that is now being held virtually. Unfortunately, this conversation would have been normally held in Milwaukee along with everybody else. But what I find really refreshing about this conversation is that it allows us to have a candid conversation with our audience across the country. It allows us to have a conversation that's more intimate, to get down to the dirty, ask Julian Castro a couple of questions that he may otherwise not realize that I would have asked. And with that, I want to really thank Julian Castro. He is the senior advisor at Voto Latino. He really does not need any introduction. But he, in this 2020 election, has been a truth sayer. He's been speaking candidly, clearly about the issues impacting the Latino community, the Black community, and America as a whole. What I found most refreshing when Joe Biden reached out to Julian Castro was the fact that he embraced the policing legislation policy that Julian had put together. And the reason I found that refreshing is because we know at Voto Latino that the issue of policing is very much an issue for the Latino community. We stand strong in alliance with the Black Lives Matter because we recognize that it also is an issue that plagues our community. And it was Julian's vision of putting a stake in the ground before it was an issue on a national stage for a candidate to think boldly, openly, audaciously, to recognize that we need reform. And with that, I welcome Secretary Julián Castro to the conversation. Julián, thanks for joining.
Hey, María Teresa, it's good to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I was just saying a few minutes ago before you came on that I feel like I'm right back in the middle of a campaign. There's back to back. I'm sure you feel the same way during this DNC week with events and with interviews and the excitement of watching on a nightly basis the proceedings of the convention. So it's been fun.
But this is your favorite one, right? This is the one that you were really looking forward to.
Right. So in 2008, Joaquin, my brother and I, we stayed in some Motel 8 in Denver to go watch the one in Denver. And then in 2012, of course, that was a huge one for me in Charlotte. I was the keynote speaker, had a great time, nerve-wracking time too. And then I was there in Philadelphia in 2016 to see Hillary Clinton accept the nomination. That was a wonderful experience. This one is different, very unusual, but the numbers in terms of viewers last night were very positive for Democrats. And, I feel like people are definitely making the most of these circumstances that we're under.
It is, but it's so funny because oftentimes when we talk about these conventions, it's for folks who really know me, I'm more of a hermit. I rarely go out. I know that's going to be shocking to folks, but I love the convention, Julian, because it's an opportunity to see the buttons, to see the energy, to find your tribe. What we do every day is very much a strange industry when we actually get excited about policy, and there all of a sudden you find your ilk every 4 years, and I do miss it. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the one part that I miss the most in terms of the physical setup is it's so fantastic to be out there on the floor and you have the different state delegations and, then going to the meeting rooms where all the different caucuses are meeting. That's exciting. Now, what's taking the place of that are these virtual rooms and virtual meetings, and that's great too. But more than anything else, I'm cheering on, the DNC and Vice President Biden and Senator Harris. There's a lot of energy, I think, behind the ticket, but we know that it's a long way until November, and so I'm trying to do my part to help make sure, like everybody else on my end, that they get elected.
And you're doing your part because not only are you doing Zooms by a 1,000 cuts, as I would say, but you're also speaking true truth and you're moving the agenda. Talk to me a little bit about specifically what you expect to hear from Kamala tomorrow night, what you expect to hear from Biden on Thursday.
Well, as you know, Senator Harris has this amazing immigrants' American dream story that I believe resonates with so many people, most especially the Latino community, because in so many ways, her story is our story. In her case, an Indian mother and a Jamaican father who came here with big dreams, and look, their daughter is about to be nominated for Vice President of the United States. Those are the same big dreams that, in the hearts and minds of so many Latino families across the country, whether they want to go into politics or go into business or education or anything else. So I expect her to really connect with Americans on that. And of course, to do what all running mates do, which is to make the case for Joe Biden. And it's an easy case to make because in a time.
So what is that case? What is that case? Because I think that one of the things that for Voto Latino for the very first time we endorsed back in April, because what we were hearing were swirlings of rumors was that both parties were the same, that there really wasn't a distinction. And we wanted to sound the alarm saying that is not the case, that there is a distinction, especially on the issues that you espouse. So talk about it, make that case. Why Joe Biden? Why now?
So many reasons. Number one, it has become so clear that in the United States, what we need right now is an effective president. Michelle Obama made the case last night, I think very well, that Donald Trump is just in over his head. You compare the United States coronavirus experience to every other country in the world. We've taken longer to get past that first wave and deal with the second wave. A lot of countries haven't even had a second wave because they did it right the first time, but the United States has. Our economy has been hit harder. More people are still out of work. And a lot of that is because we have a president who didn't take this seriously, who was more interested in his poll numbers and his reelection prospects and listened to ideology instead of science and the public health. So a competent, effective leader, that's what Joe Biden has always been. And that includes the economy. The Obama-Biden administration had the best track record in terms of an economic recovery, more than 70 straight months of positive job growth. That was a record. And then secondly, for the Latino community, it's just night and day. Their policies on investing in healthcare, the Obama-Biden administration with the Affordable Care Act made health insurance real for more than 4 million Latinos that didn't have it before. All of those families that now were able to get health care that didn't before. Educational opportunity, making college much more available and affordable. Immigration policy. We have a president that has been cruel-hearted and ill-intentioned and used immigrants as scapegoats. And you have Joe Biden, who wants to extend the hand of opportunity to immigrants and to fix this issue that we have with DACA, to put people on a pathway to citizenship and to end that cruelty, and investing in things like small business to put people back to work. Joe Biden has a strong track record there. In the Latino community, as you know, it's a very entrepreneurial community. And Joe Biden has a vision to make sure that people can pursue their dreams there. So it's just night and day. They're not the same. And, my hope is that during this convention, that those distinctions will become even more clear to people.
And I think I want to drill down on something, because I not only is that it's something that Michelle Obama said yesterday too, that for me was really, I think really drove home the difference between the two. And that was the sense that we have a president right now that doesn't listen. Whereas what you're saying and what Michelle Obama said last night was that when Joe Biden gets elected with Kamala Harris, we have a shot of addressing the big systemic issues impacting our community, because they are willing to have us at the table to listen. Whereas we have a president right now that not only does not listen, but does not actually have an opportunity for us to really negotiate. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think what we have is a president who has made up his mind that he's going to be a president for 37% of the country that he sees as his base. And, that's who he's pitching to. That's who he thinks about. That's who his administration is trying to serve and also trying to gin up ahead of November. And everybody else is on their own. In Joe Biden, what we have is a man who throughout his time in public service has demonstrated that he cares about everybody. He understands people are going to have their differences. And in this polarized environment, he respects people that may disagree with him, but he wants to work for them too. And he also wants to include every community, including the Latino community, in that vision for prosperity.
I think that we have lost Julian, but he will join us in a second. I have to say that I have had the joy and the opportunity to get to know Julian in the last 5 years since he was Secretary of Housing under Obama, and he has been able to demonstrate again the full force that he is. And our job at Voto Latino is to provide you with information so that you can make the best decision for you and your family. I think that we could all agree that the biggest challenges right now that we face as a country have to be done, the solutions have to be done together. And when Julian comes back to us, I want to ask him a little bit about how he is navigating his life post the presidential campaign. He alluded a little bit to what he was doing. And then I also want to talk to him about what he would recommend for folks that are first-time voters and trying to get people to participate. This election is critical for the Latino community on so many levels. And one of the things that Voto Latino, when we endorsed Joe Biden, we wanted to know from him directly was, how was he going to address the issue of education? How was he going to address the issue of immigration? How was he going to address the issue of climate and gun violence? And in that, Joe Biden came back with, we gave him a 2-page agenda, and he came back with a 22-page reaction, providing us with real solutions, recognizing, for example, that when we talk about wanting to have access to education, he is promising universal education for kids in pre-K3. For the Latino community, where in some states we're up to 51% of the classroom, that's game changing, because we know that early education is the fastest way to help children level up when you come from modest means compared to people in a fancy zip code. The other thing that we learned from Joe Biden in that piece was that he wanted to provide free education for individuals based on means testing, but free college education for state and community colleges. That levels us up. We know that the Latino community, we are a tsunami of young people waiting to get engaged, a tsunami of young people waiting in the wings to change this country, a tsunami of young people who are hungry to participate in our country, but who also have a really deep, deep, deep understanding of the obstacles that they and their families face. And so when Julian comes back, I'd like to have this conversation with him. But perhaps what we can do right now, and I'm going to go ahead and ask Norberto, who's the man behind the scenes, if there's perhaps any questions coming from the audience that we can go ahead and ask while we're waiting for Julian to join us again. Oh, there you are, Julian.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
You don't understand. I have all these questions I told the audience that I had lined up to ask you. So brace yourself now.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, I don't. As soon as it went off, I texted my wife. I said, "Oh, are other folks on Wi-Fi? It is a circus over here. It wasn't.
Talk about it. Yeah,
I don't know what happened.
But talk about it. You are living right now the quintessential family experience. Talk about it. You're in back to school mode. How is that impacting you?
Yeah. So, we have an 11-year-old Karina. Some folks may remember her when she was 3 years old from the Democratic Convention in 2012, flipping her hair. She's 11 now. She just started 6th grade yesterday. They go to the public schools of San Antonio, the San Antonio Independent School District. My son, Christian, just started kindergarten. Of course, they're going virtual. So that means that we have to coordinate all of this, and my wife is working. Also, Erica, she's the lead coach for elementary curriculum coaches in one of the public school districts. Yeah. She's hopping around doing her thing too, and trying to juggle all of that. Yeah, I have a feeling a lot of families are going through this right now, and it truly, one of the silver linings of this time period for a lot of folks is getting to spend more time with family, but also It does. Everybody is being asked to kind of venture into new territory, and we're very fortunate. I mean, we're lucky. We have so much, but I feel for a lot of families where they don't have the same ability, either because of lack of technology or the parents are wondering, what are we going to do? We have to go work. We don't have that option. It's put a lot of families in a bind, and we're just feeling the tip of the iceberg of that. Nothing compared to what a lot of other families are going through.
So what tips does your wife offer for as a teacher? What tips does she offer your family, and are you following them?
Yeah, I'm trying to, number one, like close communication with the teachers on the other end, my kids' teachers, and also just making sure they're prepared, and take some getting used to for the kids because they haven't done this before. And when whether it's kinder or six or whatever it is MarÍa, Teresa, confidence that the kids have in class is important. And so you want to give them this sense of stability, but also like, a new venture, but they can do it. And I think about my own kids. I know when I was going through school, I was not one of the more talkative ones in class. And the new format, if somebody is on Zoom or whatever the format is, it's odd because if you're not a talkative student, you become even more passive. And what does that do to the learning experience? These are the kinds of, I think, things that all of us are going to be exploring more and more as parents, as educators in this new reality. And I know that a lot of other parents are going through this too. The other thing we're wondering about is, okay, well, how long is this going to last? Right. Is this the first 9 weeks? Is this until the beginning of 2021? Is it the whole school year? That's why it's so important, what you and I are talking about today, that we actually have people in charge that are going to be able to get us through this as quickly and effectively as possible, instead of having it drag on the way that it has, because we've had an administration that was not prepared and didn't take the steps necessary to stem this sooner.
So I guess my question to you, because we were talking a little bit about Joe Biden's education platform, and one of the things that I found so striking was that he wants to offer free pre-K, universal pre-K to all American children. Can you talk a little bit how that disproportionately impacts Latinos specifically?
Of course. For any kid, we know that based on the research, if you have $1 to invest in a child's education, the best investment is when they're young, when their brains are developing at their fastest rate. They have their whole educational journey ahead of them. That's one of the reasons that we did something called Pre-K for SA when I was mayor of San Antonio, with business and education and community leaders to expand high-quality full-day pre-K for 4-year-olds. Well, the fact is that communities of color oftentimes face several obstacles. Number one, they're less likely to have good, high-quality pre-K. Secondly, when they do have pre-K, it's often in school districts that are not as invested in and are not as high performing. So it's important, this commitment that Joe Biden wants to make to fully invest in high quality pre-K for our young people. That's going to disproportionately benefit children of color, including many Latino young children. And why the Latino community? Because ours is a very young community. I think the median age, if I remember correctly, of Latinos is maybe 10 years old. It's very young.
We cluster around 11 years old. Like, that's what's really strange, right? Like, 60% of Latinos are under the age of 33. And
I mean, it's amazing, to look at the
demographics. It's not me, but yes.
Well, you're not too far off from there.
Oh, come on. No. Could you imagine?
We like to think. But
yeah, I know. My staff reminds me now.
But so anytime somebody is making that kind of investment that Joe Biden is serious about, and folks will remember that I think it was in 2012, President Obama proposed universal pre-K. That's right. The Republicans didn't go along with it. I'm glad to see that Vice President Biden is seeking to build on that. It's a commitment out of his heart and out of what he knows is good for our nation's future. And it would disproportionately benefit young Latinos because they make up such a greater percentage of our school-age children, and especially children under the age of 5.
So I guess what that brings us to, we talked a little bit about the importance of the pre-K education. You talked a little bit about your own experience living under this COVID moment and bringing your kids back to school. And we talked a little bit about how young everybody in the Latino community is. But I also deeply believe that it's the young people that have this outside influence in their families because they're navigating America for, whether it's at the doctor's office or in the case of Voto Latino in democracy. One of the things that we're seeing, though, is that the young Latinos right now feel that they don't belong in this conversation. And my opinion is that you belong more because all the big decisions are going to impact you disproportionately, depending on what happens after COVID. Talk a little bit about that. How do you encourage a young person that basically is overwhelmed, very rightly so, because perhaps they can't go back to school or they've lost their jobs or their parents? How do you get them to recognize that leadership matters, and how do you get them involved?
Well, I think you relate it directly to their lives, right? To those struggles. And and also I would say that the number one thing that, and this is especially directed at everybody, all of the folks who are in office right now, the number one thing that you can do to reach those people that are on the sidelines, that wonder whether all this matters, that say, I'm not gonna, why register to vote, or why vote because it's not gonna make a difference, or they're all the same. The number one thing that I think elected officials can do is to produce results. Whether you're at a city hall, state legislature, or in Congress, produce results that actually make a difference in people's lives. A great example of that is the Affordable Care Act, that for its time was a monumental step forward. Mm-hmm. And more than 4 million Latinos benefited from that. People can feel the difference in their lives. They know that meant something. When we did pre-K for SA in San Antonio, that's what we had parents tell us, that this was something they hadn't expected, but was great for their child. So people need to go beyond talking, politicians who are in office, and actually produce results on these things. Now, sometimes that's hard. If you have a Mitch McConnell blocking things in the Senate, or back a few years ago, Paul Ryan or John Boehner, or in any number of state legislatures, people that are trying to block things, but work on producing results. For people who are in public life and making the argument campaigning, I would say to connect these issues to the everyday lives of people. Mm-hmm. I came up through local government, and a lot of it, one of the good things about local government is so close to the people. Yeah. You go knock on folks' doors and you talk to them, and they complain about a pothole that was right out on their street, or the fact that they hadn't had sidewalks built on their street and they lived there for 30 years, or that when it rained, their garage started to get flooded because they didn't have adequate drainage in their neighborhood. But it was things that they could feel, and if you could fix it, they would understand the value of participating, that you're listening to them, and that their vote matters. And we need to do as much of that as we possibly can.
And I think you touched upon something, because a lot of folks said, I've heard said, well, I went and I voted in 2018, but I didn't really see that much change. But you touched upon the obstruction that's happening right now in Washington, and you mentioned the obstruction by name, Mitch McConnell. Talk a little bit about it, because most of our audience are either first-time voters or just starting to learn a little bit about the political process. And they said, well, I came out in 2018 and I'm still struggling, and I'm struggling more. Talk about the difference and what needs to happen in November.
I mean, it's an important point. Look, in our democracy, there's going to be disagreement, right? And no party is going to get 100% of what they want. But what's developed, especially in the last 25 years, has been a Republican Party that is the party of no, that is absolutely dead set on trying to block the expansion of opportunity, especially when it comes to investments that would disproportionately impact low-income families and families of color. That makes it harder, because then they flip that into this argument that, oh, look, your vote doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference what you do, because nothing's going to change, after they're the ones that block that progress.
Right.
So instead of discouraging or dispiriting people, that should make folks work even harder to overcome them so that we can remove that roadblock. What does that mean for November? It means that, Democrats have the opportunity to take back the Senate, to dump Mitch McConnell, including here in my home state of Texas, where MJ Hagar is running against the Senate's number 2 leader, John Cornyn.
You said that the state has had too many Hispanics, right? Like those were his words, right?
I mean, this is a good point, MarÍa Teresa. Just yesterday, there was reporting that analyzed deaths from COVID-19. And in Texas, 53.6% of the deaths from COVID-19 have been Latinos. Latinos make up about 41 or 42% of the state. So they're well overrepresented in terms of the number of deaths. I think that's also true in terms of hospitalizations and infections. But in part, that's because we have a Republican leadership that doesn't truly care about the fate of these folks. And that's no better represented than in the Valley of Texas. Many people out there have probably read about what's going on in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, which is along the border with Mexico. But if we back up,
refresh us, because not everybody has. Refresh us. What is happening?
So these are the counties that include cities like McAllen, Brownsville, Harlingen, that are along the southern border, contiguous with Mexico. And there's only, I believe, one significant public hospital. Investments in healthcare, investments in educational opportunity, no law schools, one medical school. Over the years, those investments have not been made. It's also a low wage area, many service sector jobs and other jobs that don't pay very well and have meager benefits. And so you add all of that up, and it's also largely Latino, more than 70%, I believe. You add all of that up, and what we see there is a COVID outbreak that is the worst in Texas and one of the worst in the United States, and a high fatality rate compared to other parts of Texas. We need a different vision for how we invest in communities like that. And you can write that story not only in the Valley of Texas, but also in a number of other places around the United States where you have leadership that is so out of touch with the needs, particularly of low-income families and families of color.
And I think that what you're stressing, I'm in agreement, because what we haven't done as a country is even do a collective mourning of 150,000 folks that have passed since COVID, and we haven't recognized that loved one could have been a grandparent, a parent, or a son, and we are actually disrupting nuclear families in ways that we will never know the total repercussions of it. And yet we don't have a leader that even takes it as a moment of silence or as a moment of seriousness. How do you think that in this moment we can come together as a nation to address that? I actually think that the health disparities in COVID it's very much along race and socioeconomics, and where our community doesn't have the luxury of deciding if we can shelter in place. Very few of us do. Talk a little bit about that.
I think one of the most resonant things that First Lady Michelle Obama said last night was, he pointed out this lack of empathy in our current leadership. And that if we're not careful, that tends to spread throughout, that sets an example that spreads throughout our country. And she said that, she understands who we really are and can be, and that's not us. And, in Joe Biden, we have somebody who has experienced a lot of hardship in his own life, understands the grief of a father, he understands loss. And I've seen that understanding firsthand on display, both on the campaign trail and when I worked with him in the Obama-Biden administration. That's an important part of what's at stake in this election is character and how we treat each other as people in this country. We need to not just change the policy, we need to change the direction, the character of our leadership in order to get better as a country.
And I think that's what has been most striking for me in the last 4 years, is that we have always, as Americans, always really claimed and embraced this idea of coming together and banding together to help, whether it's after a hurricane and providing relief here or providing relief in another country. And right now it seems, with the exception of the essential workers, and we definitely are seeing heroes rise up, we don't see a body politic that speaks to how do we address the pain of the most vulnerable, as if that will just be, hidden in the shadows. And I have to say, like, since Trump has been elected, for me, it's been such a personal journey of also, I would say, very structured pain and anger. I wake up every morning trying to figure out how to get this guy out of office. I mean, that is what I do. But it's a pain and anger because I feel like he has taken the values that we aspire to in this country and basically ripped them off and left them at the door. And all of us are scrambling to pick up the pieces. And I do believe that Joe Biden offers a different vision of that. And one of the most striking conversations I had with Biden when he was at the White House was when he was talking about his own grandparents' immigrant experience as an Irish person, as an Irishman. And he was saying, my grandfather would tell me stories on how he wouldn't be able to go and drink out of a water fountain because it said no Irish or whites allowed, and that wasn't him. And so I do think that in him and in Kamala, they have these, seeds of experience of what really is the foundation of America that we seem to have forgotten collectively under Trump. What is your reaction to that? Because I do think that we are, half our story in America is, it's a mythology, but some of it is also very real. And it's like a set of values that as Americans we have espoused, but with the ascension of this man, we seem to have, collectively amnesia of how to treat each other.
Yeah, well, I think Trump has just appealed to the worst angels in our nature. And one of the things that, for years I've been proud of this country for is that generally we've been getting better.
Yeah.
That there's less bias, less bigotry, less hate in the hearts of the youngest. And so each generation was getting more and more, not just tolerant, but appreciative of differences among people and understanding. And I think Michelle Obama alluded to this last night, just briefly, but I think one of the worst things is that Donald Trump has set a different example, completely different, completely on the opposite end, and unleashed this sense again that it's okay to hate or to look down on people who are different, to scapegoat them, to demonize them, otherize them. That's certainly true with regard to immigrants and the Latino community, but a number of other communities as well. So what does that mean? I mean, that means for all of us as parents, for all of us as leaders or people in public office, that we have to set our own example. That is about the best of who we are and who we can be, and in that way move our country forward. But as long as you have a president who is going in the other direction, you're swimming against the tide a little bit. That's what was so wonderful about Barack Obama. Here was a man who embodied, people overcoming those biases and moving us in the right direction. So I think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, with their own experience, will also move us forward.
And can I talk to you about something I think that it is the elephant in the room? We talk oftentimes that the Latino vote is the second largest voting bloc for the first time, that it is so important to talk to us, to mobilize us, oftentimes because nobody does. But yet we're widely absent from the main stage at the DNC. What's your reaction to that?
As you know, I've had a reaction to that. I mean, here's kind of the course of events over the last few days. last week it was pointed out to me that when the primetime speakers lineup came out, there were about 35 slots, and that only 3 were Latina or Latino.
Mm-hmm.
That there were no Native Americans, no Muslim Americans. And so I said that I was disappointed, and that didn't reflect this beautiful coalition that you and I know Democrats have put together that have been
Mm-hmm.
powering victories in 2018 and before that. Yeah, it just didn't reflect our party, and I said that. And with regard to Latinos, I said, look, I believe that Vice President Biden is going to win in November. He's going to win Latinos. And he deserves to, because he has a track record and the vision that has earned their vote. But the danger is that we could win the battle and lose the war, which is that, we can win in November, but then see a sliding back or erosion of support among Latinos, or more non-participation.
Right.
From 2012 to 2016, Latino voter turnout fell from 48.5% to 47%. We have, Voto Latino that is doing fantastic work and is on its way to registering at least 500,000 new Latinos to vote in November. So that's great work. But at the same time, people do get messages from something like who actually, is out there on the stage. Having said that, over the weekend, the DNC did make additions to their program. And while I wish that there were still more Latinos speaking in prime time, Eva Longoria, who you and I both know, has been not only a great actor, but also a great activist, was hosting last night. There was a young woman, Kristen Urquiza from Arizona, that told a very moving story about her 65-year-old father, who was a Trump supporter and listened to Trump and did not take the coronavirus as seriously as he could have, because Donald Trump basically said, oh, you don't need to. And he ended up passing away. She delivered a powerful statement about why we need to support a leader like Joe Biden, who's going to listen to the experts and the science and get us through this pandemic. She's Latina. There were a broad array of faces, non-politicians, in addition to the terrific Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. So look, it's a work in progress. We need to make, progress still. At the same time, I am happy that some very powerful stories were told and resonant voices were heard from the Latino community and beyond. And, we're all coming together during this convention and through November to make sure that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are our next president, vice president. That doesn't mean that we can't point out where there needs to be.
And I think what you're highlighting, and this is, I think, the challenge. We, in the Latino community, we know the stakes are so high for our community that we end up having to self-organize. That's wonderful. We're used to, doing it ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
But in that, there needs to be some sort of recognition of what we bring to the table. And it is a group of people who deeply believe in the Democratic Party, deeply believe in the country, and who deeply have skin in the game. I would say in a very different way that is so nuanced that many people don't recognize. But I was having this conversation with our buddy Sol Trujillo the other day. And Sol, for everybody in the audience, Sol is a staunch Republican, but not anymore. So,
well, yeah, he doesn't like Donald Trump at all, right?
No, but he's a Republican. But we were having this really conversation. He's like, the challenge that most Americans don't realize is that with Donald Trump, we have 11 million of us that wake up every single morning with the threat of deportation and harassment. And the satellite 60 million of us that also feel that simply for being brown. And that is internalized anxiety and that stresses our systems in ways that are now starting to be better understood. And in our community, it's compounded by the fact that we don't seek mental health services, that we don't talk about how we're feeling, because it's all of a sudden seen as being vulnerable and exposing yourself. And so there's all these microaggressions that are, very macro coming from the White House, that if he were to stay in office, our community is going to be once again more deeply hurt. And I think it's that lack of acknowledgement and nuanced understanding of why this election is so important. It's important for all of America, but it's particularly important for the Latino community because we woke up to a different country the moment Donald Trump was elected. And I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I think that is my challenge with the Democratic Party at times. It's like we're here because we have a different level of skin in the game, and it's almost as if it's not acknowledged because there's still this misunderstanding that we're foreign.
Yeah, I mean, and I said this in an Axios interview that I think went up last night, which is that too often times the Latino community is invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't just mean in politics. I mean, my brother has a great op-ed today about Hollywood.
Oh, I have to read it. I love the way you plug it.
Check it out in Variety today. I never thought my brother would write for Variety magazine, but here we are. But as chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Joaquin has been focused on representation in Hollywood. They've spoken to the studios. They called in the major publishers. And my brother tells this story that I think is very powerful. A few weeks ago, they had some of the heads of the major publishing houses virtually at a hearing. And my brother asked one of them if he could point out 3 Latinos or Latinas that had made a difference in history, in our nation's history. And the guy told him that he couldn't. And look, nothing against whoever that was, that individual, and people can go back and look at the hearing, but I think that that's indicative of the lack of awareness that a lot of people in this country, including people in our own community, the lessons are not taught in our schools, have about the contributions that the community has made over many generations. We have Latinos that have been here for 10 generations and that arrived 10 weeks ago, and all of them contributing to the forward progress of our nation, but not seen oftentimes, not only in Hollywood, in politics, in business, in so many other ways. And I think that's part of the challenge, is to change that dynamic, to work hard to do it. One way that we can do it, because we're a very hardworking community, is to register and to go vote. Because the more you register, the more you vote, the more people do listen to you. And as you know, one of your predecessors in voter registration, Willie Velasquez.
Yes, he's from Texas, right?
That's right, from San Antonio. Used to say, they came up with "Su voto es su voz," that your vote is your voice, and that's more true than ever before. And so that's one way that people can change things.
Well, and I think, and I do think that our biggest challenge in the Latino community, you mentioned it, our history is not part of the history books. And so, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I constantly learn about our contributions to this country. And I can't even say that we're footnotes, right? But we helped build this. And that is, I think, one of the challenges, like, how do we reconcile it? And I think one of the ways that we reconcile it is by turning Texas blue. A fun fact, folks, Texas has one of the largest school districts in the country. They dictate what goes into our history books. So if we turn them blue, maybe we could have much more representation. That's true. So I want to talk a little bit. We have a couple of questions, and I know that we're coming on time, but, one of them is how do we ensure Latino issues, voices are included in national conversations? I think you touched a little bit about that. I think, yes, we vote, but what else? I know that your brother just also helped pass legislation for the American Hispanic Museum, Latino Museum, which is a huge feat to talk about our issues. But what else can everyday people do for representation?
Well, I mean, I think use your voice, speak up. Let's just go back to the example of Hollywood. For many movies, when they, in normal times, when they premiere, Latinos make up 25, 30, 35% of the ticket buyers that go and attend these movies on opening weekend, right? And at the same time, you hardly have any Latinos on the screen. You hardly have any on the board of directors of any of these companies. So you hardly have any even behind the camera, right? people can use their purchasing power to make a statement. I think, in its most positive form, it begins with supporting other Latino talent and the films that are made, and that do reflect the community. I remember in my own life that when you grow up, you hear about movies and that people say, oh, I saw that character, and that I could see, people that I know, my uncle or my cousin, like I know the character, and I never felt that way until I think I saw La Bamba, which came out.
I just got chills. You mentioned La Bamba, and I think that was all a collective experience of we see each other, right? That was the first time for me too.
Yeah, so support, people can support those kinds of endeavors that are often in, art house theaters and, now on Netflix. So being supportive, I think using your voice, and policy-wise, make representation important in terms of when people vet candidates. Look, somebody gets elected, but that's not the end of the story. Who do they put on the staff? Who do they appoint to boards and commissions at the citywide level or the statewide level? In Congress, what are they doing to further this issue? You can make this a part of how you vet candidates and ask them about it. So there's so many different ways that people can be active there.
And so I have you have a fan here. Her name is Teresa Gonzalez, coming in from New York. Hello, Teresa. So apparently you had a conversation with New York Latinas and wanted to know and apparently you were fantastic. I totally understand. I believe.
Yeah. I remember that meeting. Yeah, the food was good.
The food was good. See, that always to our tummy. So she's asking, how do you suggest that Latinas in particular impact issues? Let me backtrack. How does Secretary Castro suggest we ensure that issues and voices of Latinas are included in the national conversation?
Well, look, I'm the son of a Chicana activist who ran for city council when she was 23 years old in San Antonio in 1971. And, she didn't win, but she remained very active on Latino empowerment and women's empowerment. And I was able to win city council at the age of 26. And one of the things it taught me is that we all have a role to play, whether it's in public office or protesting on the streets, or on a public board or private board, trying to move the private sector in the right direction, in churches and neighborhood associations. So my answer to that is Latinas are natural leaders. Anybody who's been part of a campaign can see that very, very clearly. I would say to continue to do what you do, but also, go for it in terms of leadership. And I know that that's harder, that it's easier said than done. But I think that there is a hunger there for Latina leadership and natural leadership that is there. I hope more people are running for office. I'm very proud that with People First Future, which is my effort to support bold progressive candidates, we're supporting people like Candace Valenzuela, who is running in Texas' 24th congressional district and would be the first Afro-Latina elected to Congress if she wins in November. Run for office, seek leadership positions in boards and commissions at the local level or at the state level, and continue to be involved. Also, I think it's up to the guys, right, to be more helpful than a lot of times we have been in the past in any number of different ways. And so this is really also a challenge for men that in our community, right? I think in a lot of families, in a lot of part of our community, there's been a traditionalism a lot of times about the role that people play. My mother told me a number of times that when she ran for office and got involved in politics, that even some people close to her told her back then that, that she was stepping out of her role. Unfortunately, sometimes people still feel that way now. Not only, this is not only in the Latino community, I think in all communities, but I want my 11-year-old daughter, Karina, to feel like she can be anything that she wants to be. And so I think that men have a role to play in reevaluating our own attitude and then taking steps to be supportive of Latinas in leadership in any way that we can.
And First, I amen to that, because I think oftentimes when we have these conversations, what I find is that there's, when we're talking about who's in charge of childcare, you go down the list of roles that are typically for women, but we don't include men as part of that solution. And we need to make sure that we have allies to be able to do that. And it's having that allyship of having that conversation, with each other, with men, among men, about how to do that. I think it just goes a long way, because you're right. We want our daughters to be able to walk into a room feeling safe and confident that she too has a shot at that job, regardless of her background. And that brings us all together. As we close out the conversation, Secretary, I want to ask you, what are you looking for at the end of this election? Like well, actually, I had two questions for you. So I'm going to ask you the first one. What was the advice that your mother gave you while you were campaigning? Did she give you any advice, any tips?
She's given me the same advice since I started in politics, which is to be yourself and to be honest. Mm-hmm. That's the advice that she's consistently given me. And I think it's the best advice, because I think that's what people are looking for. They want somebody, no matter whether you're running for school board or you're running for president, they want somebody that they can trust, somebody they believe is being honest with them, straightforward about who they are, what they want to do. And that's what I tried to do, during the entire campaign. She also, my mother carries our signs in her trunk. She put a sign in my yard for my brother last night.
Did she really?
She's not
a great Latina mommy. She's
like making sure that we're hitting our marks on everything. Yeah, she said, "You don't have a sign for Joaquin." Now, mind you, my brother is going to win in November.
I was like, he's not contested, right?
She wanted to make sure we had a sign in the yard, because I'm like on a semi-major thoroughfare here. But yeah,
I mean, could you imagine the opposition saying Julian Castro doesn't have a sign of his twin brother? I mean, that's a scoop right there.
She remedied that right away.
Yeah. I love that she walks around with signs. I've been fortunate enough to meet your mother on several occasions, and I'm such a huge fan of hers. So as we wrap up the conversation, I really, one of the things that we're anxious about is, what do we do in November? What is great, exceptional advice that you can give our audience that may have to convince someone next to them that they have to participate in this election?
If you want better healthcare in this country, if you want your kids to get a better education, if you want your job prospects to get better, if you want integrity and compassion in this country again, then people need to register if they're not registered. And if they are registered, they need to go vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It will make a world of difference, because we have a president that believes in opportunity for some people that look like him and have a wallet as big as his, but nobody else. We have in Joe Biden a man who wants to create prosperity for everybody, including the Latino community, which he sees as wholly American and part of this country's destiny. And that's something that all of us should be excited about. And, you asked, what do I hope we get out of this election? Of course, a new president. But more than that, I think kind of a new direction for our country. A recognition that all of us are in this together, and that we can, as they say, create America's better days ahead if we work together to create those. Donald Trump can't do that. He won't do it. He's had his chance to do it and he's failed. But Joe Biden can do it. And I hope that voters will give him a chance.
I can't agree more. I do think, and we had this conversation before, Julian, is that as dark and hard as it seems right now, our generation has an opportunity ahead of itself to reimagine what we want America to look like post-COVID. Yeah. And that could only happen when we have a public servant that is dedicated in America and who believes in her and who believes in us. So with that, Secretary, what are your words of wisdom as we wrap up? And I'll give you the last word.
To register to vote. And vote.
I didn't tee that up to him at all, by the way.
It's too important not to. Get off the sidelines. Get into the voting booth. We got to do it. All right.
I will see you in November. And folks, if you are already registered, please consider volunteering for Voto Latino. If you text volunteer to 73179, again, volunteer to 73179, you can do it from the comfort of your home, as Julian can do. And we have now officially contacted over 600,000 voters. This past weekend, folks, we passed a major milestone at Voto Latino. We've registered over 257,000 folks. It is the most that we've ever registered in our entire 15-year history. And we're not done. We're off to register another 250,000, excuse me. And we're off to contact over 1.5 low propensity voters, because we know that the power of our country and its direction is in our hands. En la lucha together.
All right. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you.
Here. We'll see.